history of the red-headed woman is one rich with symbolism. In the first part of this discussion, we have looked at she as evil, she as sexually deviant. She has equally been saintly and a hero. The red of her hair conjures both a sensuality and a ferocity. These factors have been particularly shaped by the male gaze. Having left off at the end of the pre-modern period, we can begin with the figure of Beatrice. Beatrice is a character in several of Dante Alighieri's texts, but perhaps most famously in Dante's Divine Comedy. Beatrice is Dante's lover, who after dying sends a Virgil to guide Dante on his epic journey. She is credited as the muse to the story. Given we know little about Beatrice's appearance other than her beautiful face and eyes which glint like stars, I am casting Beatrice in the modern period through the eyes of Dante Gabriel Rossetti. Rossetti's beloved, his own Beatrice, was his wife Elizabeth Siddal. After Siddal's tragic death at the young age of 32, Rossetti painted Beta Beatrix, depicting Siddal as Beatrice at the moment of her death. The title translates to Blessed Beatrice. Her body and golden hair, Siddal's natural hair colour, are illuminated by the golden glow coming from above and behind the composition. The red dove, a symbol of love, brings a white poppy, symbolising laudanum, the cause of Siddal's death. The two figures in the back are Dante looking at the spirit of Siddal stroke Beatrice's life, the figure in red holding a flame in hand. The overall image has a hazy mist to it. The dreamlike quality adds to the spirituality of the painting, as if alluding to the threshold between our world and the afterlife. Elizabeth Siddal featured in many of Rossetti's paintings, where her red hair is a beautiful vivid orange against her well-known sickly complexion. Siddal's life is discussed to a bigger extent in another video on this channel, link in the description, where we discuss the erasure of women's agency when being designated the label Muse. Here the redhead is hoisted to the position of the tragic muse. Rossetti felt such a kinship with Dante Alighieri, he would sign his name as Dante when publishing poems and paintings, and became known as Dante Gabriel Rossetti. We can't overlook Ghirlandata when discussing Rossetti in the context of redhead women. This painting is a subjective and rather saccharine depiction of love and beauty. This model was someone called Alexa Wilding. She was surrounded by green foliage in a composition which was typical to the romantic sentiment which often depicted women in nature. The green equally brings out the redness of her hair as its complementary colour. There were several depictions in the modern period of women with red hair as the idealised depiction of beauty, particularly that of Venus. Given the backlog of history we have explored up to now in the first video, it is no wonder that red-headed females were favoured so by mostly male painters. Sexually promiscuous, a little wild, almost always the centre of attention for their beguiling beauty, what's not to like? The redhead type seen as hedonistic bode well in a period famous for its prudishness in the public sphere, as was the end of the 19th century and into the 21st. Once again, I can read from Jacky Colliss Harvey's book Red, A History of the Redhead, which is an excellent compendium of a history of theories and science on the subject. Harvey notes the work done by Dr. Galopin in the 19th century. He had a theory that we would call dubious in the contemporary, about women with red hair exuding a stronger scent than any other woman of a different hair colour or darker complexion. He said of their natural scent, "And some women with that hair colour, who have very white skin, exhale a soft odour of violets from most of their sebaceous glands. When they are hot, the coquettes pretend they don't know the ravages their perfume molecules make in the brains of those who breathe them in." This erroneous and misogynist theory of the red-haired woman got picked up in German author Patrick Süskind's novel Perfume, written in the 1980s, but set in this 19th century French period. The protagonist is a peculiar solitary figure, Jean-Baptiste Grenouille, with a science-defying good nose, who goes on a murderous rampage collecting the scents of women. The following excerpt describes the encounter of his very first victim. She had red hair and wore a grey sleeveless dress. Grenouille stood bent over her and sucked in the undiluted fragrance of her as it rose from her nape, her hair, from the neckline of her dress. He let it flow into him like a gentle breeze. He had never felt so wonderful. And now he smelt that this was a human being. Smelled the sweat of her armpits, the oil in her hair, the fishy odour of her genitals. And smelled it all with the greatest pleasure. Her sweat smelled as fresh as the sea breeze, the tallow of her hair as sweet as nut oil. Her genitals were as fragrant as the bouquet of water lilies, her skin as apricot blossoms. And the harmony of all of these components yielded a perfume so rich, so balanced, so magical, that every perfume that Grenouille had smelled until now, every edifice of odours that he had so playfully created within himself, seemed at once to be utterly meaningless. 100,000 odours seemed worthless in the presence of this scent. This one scent was the higher principle, the pattern by which the others must be ordered. It was pure beauty. The story transpires, and he once again comes across this most beautiful scent in the damsel character of Laure Richie, who of course also dons a full head of red tresses and comes to be the protagonist's main quote-unquote love interest. Siskin's novel sees once again the red-haired woman in the place of the apogee of beauty, just as we saw in the examples of paintings of Venus with red hair, the goddess of beauty. Into the 20th century, the allure of the red-haired woman continued. Transcendent fashion muse and subject of many surrealist interests, the Marchesa di Casati was certainly a quote-unquote fiery redhead. Luisa Casati was born into a Milanese family of the aristocracy, who lived eccentrically, helped along by her handsome inheritance. She powdered her face white and dyed her hair red, and is even rumoured to have whitened her large eyes with belladonna, aka the poisonous plant nightshade. She is known to have been fond of animals, or at least to be seen with them. She often walked around Venice with her pet cheetahs, and once wore a necklace made of live snakes, evocative of Lilith. The Marchesa wished to be a living work of art. She was truly performative, which turned the heads of artists and writers alike. In this portrait by Romain Brooks, Casati's golden hair is cut short, in disarray framing her face like an animated flicker of flames. She was known to be a bit of an exhibitionist, parading around public in the nude in a fur cloak, which is just as we see her here. Her cloak appears to be smoking into the abstract background as she holds it up with one arm so as to fill the entirety of the space she inhabits, despite her very slight frame. Her piercing eyes are surrounded in ashy makeup, which make her decisive stare at her audience all the more intense. Casati has since become a common point of reference in the world of fashion, since rumours of her fabulous and glittering life spread. Max Factor, makeup artist to the stars, made his Redhead's only room for his favourite stars. This room was green, red's complementary opposite. One of his star clients was Lucille Ball. Ball's hair was apparently not naturally ginger, and this was a sincerely kept Hollywood secret at the time, so much so that the henna dye she used was kept under lock and key. Ball started her career as a model, but found her success as a female comedian. Comediennes are few and far between even today, so Ball's success in her show, I Love Lucy, which rocketed her into stardom, was truly an impressive feat. This was the era of Technicolor. The first live-action film in colour, being The Wizard of Oz, saw Dorothy's auburn hair and glinting red ruby slippers. Lucille Ball's red hair made her stand out in the newly colorised moving pictures, despite already being a standout in her eponymous TV show in the 50s. In this instance, we see the red-headed woman being once again that unique designation, but in a new iteration, the quirky. Though having begun as a model, her style of comedy was goofy, and she didn't compromise the joke in order to save her feminine appearance. This is a feminist given today, but back then, as one of the first female stars, not to have the focal point of her fame be her beauty, of which she had plenty by the way, this was radical. Throughout the rest of the 20th century, we saw plenty of iterations of red-headed it girls. Sissy Spacek in the 70s, Jessica Rabbit in the 80s, great actresses like Julianne Moore, Julia Roberts, to the great fashion muse Lily Cole in the early noughties, Lilu in The Fifth Element, whose name may remind you of a certain demonic creature explored in the first part of this video, animated characters like Kim Possible, Asuka Langley Soryu, the endearing Amy Childs from Towie. Her red hair was part of that great noughties to 2010s threshold where it felt like women en masse were dyeing their hair red. Likewise, we saw Rihanna doing the same. Karen Gillan came into the public ether around this time too as a natural redhead, turning many Doctor Who fans, and otherwise, seeing a great following of Amy Pond and in turn redhead fanatics. To more recent times where Shiv Roy stole our hearts in succession, despite her family's questionable conduct, and the unconquerable Sophie, whose music lives on as her beloved legacy. Though the playground tease tends to be accusing those with red hair to be lacking a soul, we have seen the hair colour being heavily featured in art history, arguably for aesthetic purposes more than anything else, that bringing also the associations that come with the colour red. We have not so much explored that of women with dark skin and red hair. They do exist. Some weaker girls and women have naturally occurring red hair, as well as some people in the Solomon Islands. These cases are rare and not all that discussed, thus there is the lack of material at hand, given their scarcity in biological occurrence and therefore art history. As with all women, those with red hair have been designated as both evil and sensual, and thus have become fetishized. This fetishization has occurred through the male gaze rather than any chosen assertions from the subjects themselves. This two-part video works as a kind of compendium of red-haired women, highlighting the characteristics they have been involuntarily allotted. There are plenty more that were not included in this video, and you are welcome to request some more for a part 3 in the future.